Bogus emergent properties argument. I would like to briefly talk more about the concept of emergent properties. Physicalists are sure that consciousness will end up being some so-called emergent property of the activity of neurons and other electrochemical processes in the brain. But the example emergent properties that physicalists talk about are all false flags for the expectation of what consciousness will be. When these example emergent properties are deconstructed, it is always found that there is no new real property that exists as an actual phenomenon. You can always understand how the emergent property is caused by and constructed from the original phenomenon. Consciousness will not be an emergent property because emergent properties are never a real thing. They are always bogus and based on superficial thinking. There is always only the original phenomenon. Emergent properties are a philosophical mind game. Consciousness is a real phenomenon in the manifest universe and needs a real explanation beyond some incoherent emergent property diversion. I will talk about temperature being an emergent property of molecular activity and wetness and waves as being emergent properties of water. Physicalists continue to insist that these emergent property examples show how consciousness could be an emergent property of neural activity in some kind of analogous way. Temperature is not some emergent real property of anything. To the touch, temperature is a sensation of coolness and warmness, which are conscious experiences of the mind and not actual properties of the physical universe. Temperature is what we know it to be, and that is, it is a measure of the average molecular energy in a substance, not a new property. We cannot measure the energy of each molecule and then sum them together. So, temperature is simply a detection method for the average energy in substances. We can do things like put mercury in a tube with reservoir and measure the expansion of the mercury on a scale. This is not measuring some new property, it is simply measuring the amount of expansion in the mercury. Note that the expansion and contraction of the mercury is not an emergent property of the mercury, it is an actual property of the mercury. We can then calibrate the scale to correspond to the freezing point and boiling point of water to get two data points on the scale. Other temperatures are considered to be linearly distributed between these 2 points. We are detecting the expansion of the mercury and scaling to known behaviors of water. There is no actual new property of science involved. Temperature is just a convention of language used for simplicity of communication. Wetness is a measure of the presence of water and is not any kind of new property of water. To the touch, wetness manifests as a sensation of coolness and slipperiness between the fingers. It is not a property of the water, rather it is more a property of how the human conscious mind experiences the water. The amount of water can be measured with certain kinds of instrumentation. The amount of water can, for example, be measured by the changing conductivity of a sensor in the soil for moisture or by some other appropriate sensor in the air for humidity. A really sensitive enough detection device might be able to measure the presence of a single water molecule, a group of water molecules, or a sea of water molecules on a continuous scale. There is no new property when measuring how many water molecules are present. Similar to temperature, wetness is just a convention of language used for simplicity of communication. Waves, on the other hand, are an actual property of water. Waves are not an emergent property. Waves are just the movement of water molecules. I think it is true that any physical phenomenon will have some sort of wave property. There will be acoustic waves in the air for sound, electromagnetic waves in space for light, physical vibration waves in solid objects, and etc. The bogus physicalist argument is that they claim waves are an emergent property of water molecules, and that consciousness emerges from neurons in much the same way. But a wave is made out of water molecules, and it's easy to see that there are only water molecules at work here. There is no new property that just magically emerges. It is incoherent to complete the analogy and say that conscious experiences are made out of neurons. It is virtually impossible to see how conscious experiences are made out of neural activity. This is incoherent to the core of any logical thought process, but this is what they will many times push at you. This is just the hard problem of conscious experience in disguise.